Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Content Matters podcast. Today, we're talking with Jennifer Allen. Jennifer is the Chief Evangelist for Challenger, which I think we're going to talk about that a little bit, but Challenger is sales enablement and kind of consulting for salespeople. She's also the co-host of Winning the Challenger Sale. And I think that's a podcast, but there's also a webinar, which we'll talk about that too, because that's some really interesting stuff. And then the other thing I think I didn't actually know about Jennifer was that you worked for 14 years with CEB, which is now Gartner. So I expect you've had tons of experience and seen all kinds of things related to sales and marketing. So today we're going to talk about the Chief Evangelist role, which I really want to talk about. And then we'll also talk a lot about, sales and marketing and that relationship, because that's another thing that's near and dear to my heart, obviously. So welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Barb. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's great. So let's start with your background. Like, you're in sales. So how did you come to be in sales?
Yeah, I always love that question because I think I would anticipate very few people grew up as like a little girl saying, I just want to carry a bag and I want to be in sales. I certainly didn't, right? I had aspirations of being on like Saturday Night Live when I was probably in my teenage years. So I actually came into sales. I was doing event planning for a company outside of Penn State where I went to school. And we would do Final Four and bowl game travel on behalf of alumni organizations. And I loved the scenario planning aspect of it, like not knowing which direction it would go. That was really fun and exciting. Absolutely hated the go stand in a parking lot at the Sugar Bowl and like inhale bus fumes for 4 hours. Like that part was not as glamorous as I thought it would be. And so I had a roommate at the time who had gone to work at Corporate Executive Board or CEB. She was in their meetings department. And she said, hey, you should check this company out. Really smart people, really fun atmosphere. And that's all it took because I wanted to get out of central Pennsylvania at the time. And so I interviewed and they ended up putting me in an account management associate position, which is kind of like a safer SDR role where I was calling on existing customers to schedule stuff to get them to utilize the subscription they had and renew the subscription on behalf of an account director that I worked with. So it was really kind of like not my choice to go there, but it was the job they were offering. So I took it. Right. And then I was really fortunate to work for a woman that I just thought was so amazing and incredible. And I would listen to her on calls and she was just like, had such a, command of presence and was talking to, these Fortune 50 CMOs and just helping them think differently. And it really sucked me in. So I attribute a lot of what caused me to stay in sales actually as a result of my very first manager.
So how did you come to be at Challenger then? So I think there was a company in between that, but you've been at Challenger for the last 3 years. How did you come to join them?
Yeah, so it's interesting. My background makes it looks like I've jumped from like one company to another company to another company, but I've just had the good fortune of being a result of mergers and acquisitions and spin-offs. So I started with Corporate Executive Board. I was an account manager for a couple of years. Then I managed a team of account managers. Then I moved into selling the annual subscription. And then I think it was like 2015 or so, CEB got acquired by Gartner. Now, Gartner was a much larger company. And at the time, I was kind of getting the itch to do something different. And Challenger was a standalone business unit at Corporate Executive Board. So effectively, we were out there like helping like sales leaders who said, hey, love the Challenger sale book, want to implement it. We had a whole suite of services for them. So I said, you know what, that's actually really interesting to me. I think that would be a big challenge because a much bigger ticket, many more consensus requirements. It was just a harder sale. So I switched over there. And then I think about a year later, Gartner sold us off and we were acquired by private equity. So they stood up a new company called Challenger Inc. And that's where I am today.
Cool. So, but you haven't always been the chief evangelist at Challenger. That is a relatively new job for you. So tell me about this role, because I think this is a very fascinating role. I've written about it a bit, but I've never actually seen a woman in it. So I'm really curious to hear how you came into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's how you and I kind of got connected, right? As we were
Exactly.
seeking out like, hey, this evangelist thing, like I am not seeing many women do it. And I agree with you, which is why I'm excited that we're talking today. So I've carried a bag effectively for 17 years. Like I never wanted to be a sales manager, though I've done it a couple of times out of necessity. I've never wanted to run a sales organization. I've always loved being really close to the front line. And it was kind of a strange thing because you hit your peak of like titles and then you're like, well, where do I go from here? I've been the same title for 12 years now. And so last year I was like, we had split into like hunters and farmers, right? So I was a hunter. I've always liked hunting, but hunting often can be hard if you don't have a lot of leads coming in, right? And that's what I felt last year is I didn't see enough leads to make it feel comfortable. So effectively I just went out and I started writing on LinkedIn, and I joined our company's podcast, which at the time was pretty new. And what I realized, it was like a completely different challenge. So why I still love and I still carry a bag because I think it's important just to stay connected to it.
Mm-hmm.
What I loved was the order of magnitude I felt like I could have an impact was so much greater than just my own personal, annual goal that I had as a bag carrier. And so I spent a lot of time last year kind of doing things that ultimately led me to sort of like uncover this evangelist idea, which was really common in tech. And I, said, gosh, that sounds like a lot of stuff I'd enjoy doing. So I basically wrote up a job description based off of an article I had read about Dan Steinman at Gainsight, who was kind of one of the pioneers of evangelism in the sales regard.
Yeah, I've heard his name mentioned a few times that way.
Yeah. And it was a great article. I can share it with you if you want to link it in the show notes, but essentially what it did is it kind of gave me structure to understand, well, what does a role look like in this regard? And what are the things to watch out for? So I took that, wrote a job description off of it and went to my CEO and said, look, here's the impact I've been able to have this year in terms of leads I've generated or deals that have originated as a result of some of the stuff I've been doing off the side of my desk. Like, imagine if that was just my full-time job. Would you be willing to just try it out for a year? Now, I am very fortunate to work for a CEO who is like very, very good at being open-minded to innovation and trying new things. And she doesn't need like 3 years of data to prove so that we need to do something in order to do it. So I was very, very fortunate in that regard. And she said, you know what, go out, give it a shot. Like, I'm fine with this job description. Let's see how it goes. And so it was really, really cool for like that experience was cool for me because it wasn't a job that existed here. And it was, a result of just trying it out, seeing if I liked it, and then, approaching her and saying, would you be game for it?
I think it's like such a great opportunity. And I kind of look at it the same way, like if in the work that I do with companies as kind of director of marketing, kind of fractional roles, everyone says the next step is the CMO. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I don't think I want to be a CMO. I don't think I'm there. I love the industry. I love the tech. I love the strategies and I like talking about it and stuff. But I don't think I'd want to manage a bunch of people and try to do that. So I think it's an awesome job. I think you're and you do a great job of it, of what I've seen. Like, I
Well,
love
I
your LinkedIn posts. I like your podcast.
I mean, it's hard because, and I've talked about this quite a bit, but like, I am someone who does not necessarily like to be like, have the spotlight on me, which is really stupid to pick a job like this. But what I found is it forces me to be uncomfortable and it forces me to really evaluate what I do, why I do, how I do it. And that has been a really, really great learning experience for me, candidly. And I think to anybody who is, would share a sort of similar, there's the dogs, and share a similar experience where you kind of feel like you're plateauing. For me, it was really saying, let me look at all the jobs I'm doing today in terms of my role as a seller. And let me figure out where I'm the happiest. Like when I have a first call, I love those calls because it's an opportunity to shape someone's thinking versus like once I know they're going to buy, yeah, it's still cool to get a win, but it's not, it doesn't drive me as much as like the earlier part. And that in my mind is what evangelism is all about. It's like shaping someone's thinking in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Yes. There. And I said I wouldn't say that word and I did.
I'll say it probably 50 times in this conversation. You're good.
All right. So let's kind of talk a little bit, and we're going to come back to this evangelist role a little more, but I want to kind of dive into more of the sales and marketing kind of mindset and thinking that you have. So one of the things that you believe is that every salesperson needs to show up like a marketer. So I just want to know, like what does that mean, and how do you get them to think that way?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like years ago, I was one of those sellers with my hand out waiting for the leads. And when I didn't get them, it was like, marketing, what are you doing wrong? And how can you fix the problem? And what I realized, like most things in life, when you're pointing the finger to someone else and take no accountability for something, usually there's an issue with you as well. Right. And that was certainly my case. So I think for sellers, like there's all sorts, like Gartner's put out some great content. We've certainly studied this for the last like 10 years. When you look at how buyers buy, um, you can decide to show up just like a salesperson, right? There's no immediate downside to doing that. But if we reflect on the fact that like customers are out there buying like we buy cars now, like they would never say, hey, I need a new car. I'm going to make the car dealership my first spot. Like
Hmm.
no, but B2B buyer buys like that either, because it assumes like a ton of risk. You have an information disadvantage. And so if we reflect on how customers learn, what's really interesting is like customers are going out there and they're researching and they're doing all this homework before they ever call a supplier. And it's not to say they know exactly what they need, though some do, but they start to form an opinion, right? So if I, as a seller, wait until they formed an opinion about what they think they need, man, I better hope it's a bullet hitting a bullet and they formed an opinion exactly in line with what we have to offer. I
Yeah.
will say, as a salesperson, like the number of times that happens is not enough to feed my dogs and my children. And so I think it's important to reflect and understand, like, if we are not showing up where customers are going to learn, we are letting them kind of dictate what they need. And then we have to go and try to change their mind. And that's just hard. It's not impossible. It's hard. So
Yeah.
my opinion on this is like, we can make our lives a lot easier as sellers. If we go out, we have a perspective on the problems our customers are searching about, and we show up where they go to learn. And if we just put that all on marketing, like marketing represents a company, right? Like we as individuals have individual human perspectives. And I
Mhm.
think it's one of the reasons why, like there's some exceptions, but by and large, a lot of company accounts, like social accounts, could write the same exact thing as an individual and never see the reach that an individual would. And so that's why I think it's a partnership. Like marketing has to be there, but sales has to be there too. We can't just point the finger.
Yeah. Do you find it's hard to get them to think that way? Because one of the things that I have found, and it's not just sales. I find it's with marketing too, but usually it's with the sales and the management team of a smaller company. Anyway, that's who I work with. They don't get that being there and out there and kind of establishing their own presence and their own kind of thoughts. They just think they need to pick up a phone and sell. And like, how do you get them to shift? Because that's a really big change for a lot of salespeople.
Absolutely. And I think candidly, it starts at the top, right? So if you have a sales leader who's saying, just pick up the phone, dial, 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 it's volume, it's going to be hard to change individual seller behavior. So I think one of the things that I've seen work really effectively is sales leaders typically buy things, right, for their businesses. And they can sit there and say, we have to make more dials and you have to cold call and you have to do this. And I'm not someone who thinks like cold calling is dead by any means, but
I wish it was.
yeah, I mean, I wish it was, but I don't think it is.
No.
But I think like when you ask them and you say, okay, think about the last time you bought something, right? How did that process start? It probably didn't start with you getting a cold call. It probably started with you doing some research, forming an opinion about what you think you need. Maybe, someone called you at the right time, but more often than not, you probably initiated it as a result of what you learned and read. And so I think sometimes when you force someone to explore their own behaviors and actions, it creates these light bulb moments because you're like, right, that like what I did does not jive with the advice I'm giving someone else. So I think wherever we can like humanize that and get people to reflect on their own behavior, it can help with the initial phases of driving change.
Yeah. Do you think so one of the things that we've kind of heard a little bit about, used to be a lot of talk before, maybe not so much now, I'm not sure, was that sales should really report to marketing. And if they did that, maybe they would think more like a marketer and think more like that. But then there's also a lot of talk about how marketing should report, to this chief revenue officer, because marketing should be able to attribute what they do to actual sales. Do you think that org structure matters? Is it important?
I love that question. Candidly, I think people spend way too much time debating org structures when in reality, it's the things we show up and do every single day that matter a lot more. Can there be behavior changes as a result of reporting structure? Sure. But I think it's 10% of it, right?
Yeah.
We could report to marketing, but if I still have the same fundamental belief system I might check boxes for them, but I'm not going to ultimately change my behavior. So my personal belief is like the function should report into whomever is the leader who gets it, right? Who gets how their customer buys, who understands the buyer journey, who understands how both groups work together. But I've certainly worked with companies where sales and marketing are completely different reporting lines, but they work really well because the leaders are aligned in their philosophy and their mindset, even if the org structure isn't aligned.
Do you think it's possible, like if marketing is aligned with that, but sales is not, that you can convince, or how do you get that alignment? How do you make that happen?
It's such a fascinating question. Like, I think, 10 years ago, had you asked me that question, I would have given you a super naive answer, which is just like, you just need an operating system that everybody agrees to. And it's like, now I've worked with enough sales and marketing teams where I'm like, boy, sometimes you just need to call the divorce and like, it's a divorce. So I think in those instances, that's really part of like why I don't think you can just be sales or you can just be marketing. Like, I think, especially in instances, there was a company I talked to a couple of weeks ago, and they were walking me through the scenario of this. Now, this was the sales side, but they were walking me through the situation with the marketing side. And at a certain point, I just said, like, at what point do you just cut bait? Like, at what point do you stop going back in and trying to change their mind and just recognize this person does not philosophically agree with you? And instead of getting frustrated, instead of going back and asking them to do things they're not going to do, like, when do you decide that you just do it, prove the concept, and then go back to them with results? And so for me, it's like, gosh, I wish it was as easy as like having a common language and, if everybody has the same mindset, but sometimes like it is truly people problems and you
Yeah,
can't keep fighting it. Sometimes you just have to pick up the work and do it if you want to get it done.
yeah. So is this the kind of stuff that you cover in your Winning the Challenger podcast?
Yeah. So Challenger. So for anyone who's not familiar, like Challenger was a book that came out in 2012. It was the result of years of research that we did to understand what makes buyers loyal, and how does that contradict kind of conventional wisdom. And then on the other side, what is it that high performers do that make them really effective? And
Mhm.
so one of the things that came out of that work is if you look at sellers, we all have like a dominant mindset. Now, we may not be aware of it, but we have a dominant mindset that dictates how we show up with customers. So there's like a relationship builder, there's a lone wolf, there's a hard worker, there's a problem solver, there's a challenger. Now, the whole thinking was like when the economic crisis hit in 0809, a lot of the stuff that worked really, really well the last 10, 20 years stopped being so effective because the world changed around us. It was the same thing with COVID.
Yeah.
And so the reason we started doing that work was because a lot of sales leaders were like, I don't know what to tell my people to do. Marketing leaders, I don't know what to tell my people to do. So can you just go study what's working? And we get a lot of flack sometimes for Challenger because the name's provocative and it stirs up like, these images of a lot of things it's not. But what essentially did, and I speak passionately about this because it did this for me. I was someone who was a relationship builder. Like, I believed my customers bought because they liked me and I was super accessible and I was really friendly. But that didn't work when the economy crashed. Like, it didn't matter how friendly I was, they weren't opening the door.
Right.
And so Challenger gave me a different perspective around the things that high performers were doing that I wasn't, and allowed me to be more mindful of those. So I was intentional about like thinking about my customer interactions in that way. So a lot of what we talk about on Winning the Challenger sale is grounded in this research that showed us here are things that most high performers do. But here's how you take those concepts and action them. So how I show up to a discovery call differently as a challenger versus a relationship builder, how I run a group meeting differently, all these moments that we have in sellers where there's opportunities to think differently.
Cool. So there's a webinar too, though. So what's the difference between, or is it the same thing? It's just one is video and one is kind of audio. Do you kind of convert
Great
them?
question. We get that question a lot. I feel like we need to like do a better job of addressing it. So they started with the webinar. So there were two of my colleagues that started this 2 years ago. So we're in our third year of doing it. And we started with just the webinar and learned very quickly, like the podcasting space, like attracts eyes where webinars didn't.
Yeah.
So if you remember right back in COVID, it was like everybody was doing webinars and people kind of just got over it. So we said, all right, let's expand this to a different channel. So for us, the webinar is where we're actually like not only showing video, but like we're showing tools, we're showing best practices on the screen. And it's really meant to be more of a practical guidance for a seller who's saying, I want to take this concept and do something with it. The podcast is more conversational. It's like, all right, let's talk about times where Jen totally messed up this deal and what she learned from it, or, a time when she was trying social selling and like goofed it up. So a lot of the podcast, candidly, is me talking about what I've learned from big mistakes I've made in the past,
Right.
and how I personally have shifted from more relationship builder to challenger, but then now also featuring other people that we just think like challengers, whether they've been through challenger or not, like guests that we really believe execute and show up like challengers day in, day out, picking their brains.
I was driving my daughter to and from dance the other day, and I started listening to the podcast about the email when you talk to your AE and your salesperson. I thought, yeah, I would like to know. I would like to know how this cold calling and how this cold emailing, how this stuff really has changed, and it doesn't work the way it used to. And so I'm halfway through that, and I found that they have some really interesting kind of things that you can think about when you're kind of trying to do that yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, that was
So
a fun episode. I loved Ari is one of our SDRs here. It was his first time doing a podcast. And I think what a cool experience to have him talk about like his lessons learned as someone who's a bit newer to sales. So we love those type of stories.
Yeah. So you're 4 months into your role as the chief evangelist chief evangelist. That'd be nice, chief evangelist officer.
Sure would.
Is it everything that you were kind of expecting? And do you kind of, you said you wrote your description, so maybe it is everything you were expecting, but did you, so things like, did you come up against challenges when you tried to kind of take this role on, and where do you kind of envision it going in the future?
Yeah, I love this question because I wrote my own job description. So I am to blame for any frustration I have in this job.
Exactly.
What I will say is in my first year, part of what I did in my job description is like, I don't have my name on a book. Like I'm not someone who is so big that people are just like pounding down our doors to have me come speak at like their sales kickoffs. There's some of that, but not to the degree that I think a lot of like what we would consider thought leaders see. And so what I said to my CEO is in year one, why don't I spend kind of like half my time on external evangelism, half my time internal evangelism, meaning making sure we as a company are showing up as challengers and delivering the type of sales experience that we sell. And so as a result, that means a lot of running training sessions, looking at content, like stuff that would probably fall more in the enablement bucket. And I think one of the things that I've learned and grown to appreciate is I have been in a individual contributor job for prior to this 17 years, which meant, sure, I worked on a team. I had a manager. It's not like I was completely in a like basement by myself, but it was largely like autonomous. Right. Now I'm in a position where it requires a lot of teamwork and group meetings and things like that. And I think I completely underappreciated how big of a change that was in terms of like what my days look like. Because if I didn't like something in my sales territory, I would just do it differently. Right now I'm having to learn all the things we talk about, like how do you get someone to have a different perspective? All of that comes true. And so it's been challenging for me, honestly, to at sometimes just to feel very passionately about something, but realize like I have to get everybody else on board. Not everybody sees things like I do. And maybe I'm completely wrong, right? That's something that's been an unanticipated challenge for sure. And then in terms of where I see the role going, over time, I think I'll move probably more to like, 85% external evangelism, 10% still carrying a bag because it's important to me to stay connected to it. And then, 5% of just internal stuff. So it'll evolve, and candidly, I'm kind of learning as I go, but I think there's a lot of good people out there who are doing it well and are great role models to learn from.
Yeah. I think I saw on LinkedIn what you said about imposter syndrome. Like, do you fight that constantly? Like, is that a challenge for you?
Oh my gosh, it is such a challenge because I've always struggled with, I've been very open. Like I've always struggled with that and self-worth and, all the things that make us fearful of doing things we want to do. And part of the thing that is really tough for me is in this like world of evangelism, I think there are a lot of people who are really, really great role models and really selfless and doing it for the right reasons. But a little bit of what I struggle with is like, I've got like 9,000 followers. There are people out there who have like 300,000 followers. And I just, when I look at it like that, I'm like, I'm so little and I'll never have like, the opportunities that they have. And I start doing all this negative self-talk. and I have to interrupt it. Like I have to be so conscious about not comparing myself and not feeling like I shouldn't be in the game. And at the end of the day, I just have to remind myself like, hey, I have a story to tell. I have a perspective. Not everybody's going to love it. That's okay. Like I'm not here to please everybody,
Yep.
but that's hard. I'm glad you raised it because it's hard. And it's hard when you're in more of a public platform because then you're confronted with that stuff a lot. And I mean, I had my first troll the other day and it was
Oh,
hard for me. It was really, really hard. Like I took it
yeah.
really personally.
That's good, but you know what? I don't think you should have that. Everybody shouldn't agree with your perspective. I think that the people that get the most kind of conversations going are the ones who do say something different, who don't say the same thing that everybody else is on there saying. And yeah, they're all saying great stuff. I don't argue with any of that, but I
Yeah.
still think that there are different perspectives and we should be hearing them and we should be talking about them. So I'm glad that, you think that way, that that's important.
Yeah, but it definitely crosses my mind a lot. Like, because the topics that we talk about, are things like cold calling and cold emailing. And man, are those polarizing things. Like you'll get people who be like, you're stupid for saying that and what you don't know. And it's like, you're right. Like I'm learning all the time.
Yeah.
Help me understand. But like you're right, having a perspective means people will be on the other side of the fence from you sometimes. And that still is hard for me, but I think I'm getting a little bit better at it every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, advice for people who want to get into the chief evangelist role, especially women, but for anybody in general. But I think for women, because I'd said on LinkedIn, because I interviewed Randy from Uberflip, who is now the chief evangelist of his company. You see a lot of men, and you said it. You see a lot of people in tech, but you
Mm.
don't see a lot of people. I haven't seen a lot of people out that, and I definitely didn't see a lot of women. So thank you, Hank Barnes, for
Yes.
recommending you. That was fantastic. But so, what kind of advice would you give for anyone who wants to kind of grow into this role and take on this role?
Yep. So there's two things I would share. So one is if talking about the problem your company solves is where you find a lot of passion, um, start by there's nothing stopping you from going out and finding your voice on platforms like LinkedIn or whatever platform, like based on your audience, it gets the most eyes and starting to share some of your perspective about the problem. I think where you have to stop yourself is from then going into, and this is why we're the best company to solve it. Cause I think that's the line as to where like evangelism kind of stops is like, get people to think the way you want them to think. And then that's where marketing and sellers pick up. So one would be like, go out, start writing on LinkedIn. You'll find your voice, you'll find your story, you'll mess up, but it's a fabulous way to learn. Two is learn from people doing the job today. Watch how they spend their time, watch the way they communicate, watch what they can, like what resources they go to, what podcasts they listen to, because you can learn a lot about evangelism just as a bystander. The second like theme of advice I would give though is don't make the same mistake I did where I felt like I had to do the job without the job for 10 months. And I find that we as women do this a lot, right? Like men will be like, I'm going to do this job
Yeah.
and get
Oh
behind
yeah.
me. And right. And then
Yeah.
we're like, I've done it without getting paid for this long. And this is what results I've seen. So I think there's something to be said because evangelism is so new and it sounds goofy. Like, let's be honest, it's such a goofy term. So I think you do need something to back it up,
Yeah.
but don't feel like you've got to do it for a year or get like 25 stories of impact before you actually take the plunge and make the case for doing it. Because sometimes what will be required is you could do everything right, but you still need, like, you'll still have that someone who's going to say, yeah, but I need to see this. And so that 8 months could turn into 16 months. And so I would say like, have a couple stories of impact, make the case, see what you need to fill in the gap, but don't like overset the bar in terms of what you think you need to do to prove yourself, especially as a woman.
Yeah. That's great advice. And I think, yeah, a lot of women, I don't know, I know I've experienced all that stuff. So I definitely understand how that's like, it feels. So
Yeah.
great conversation today. I think we could probably go on and on and on, and it would be great. But
I
I just have like two more little things I just wanted to ask you. One is on your LinkedIn profile, you have this hashtag, swipe right sales, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Like,
know. Yeah, so swipe right sales is something I came up with the other day in the shower. So I'm a big believer that a lot of times we learn through stories and analogies, right? Like you can tell me all day long the facts about something and I'll just sit there and be like, okay. But then you tell me a story and it really gets me to think differently. I think a lot of people operate like that, not everybody, but a lot. And So what I realized is when you look at the world of like online dating, which I was in a couple years ago, and you look at sales, it's so crazy to me how we will do things in sales we would never do in the dating world. Like I would never open up my Bumble app and be like, let me just tell you all the reasons I'm amazing, John. Like I can cook well and my friends think I'm really great. My last boyfriend thought I was amazing. Like you would never write like that. But when we look at sales outreach, we do it all the time. But even bigger than that, like there's a lot of parallels, like the highs and lows of dating, the highs and lows of sales. And so I kind of got like, my creative juices were flowing and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we just had like a hashtag where people could tell their own stories and see where it goes. Right. So right now it's not like a business. It's not anything at this point, but I've been really, really having a great time seeing some of the other parallels that people have drawn and used the hashtag with. So that's what that is for now.
That's really neat. That's kind of cool. Yeah. So, okay. So last question, and this one is kind of silly. You're holding this thing in your hand, and I was just dying to know what is it.
Oh my gosh, this is one of those pop-its. So my son got this for me and I try to keep my desk so clean. This thing is in my hand, like subconsciously, like I didn't even know I was holding it.
I think you had it last time we talked. And then I think when I was watching, I don't know if I was watching the social selling webinar and you had it, or maybe I was just think I did, but I'm like, it's like a stress ball. It's just
this is it. This is like my little, distraction. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, there. I said cool 3 times, which is good for me. All right. Jen, this was really great conversation. I appreciate your joining us. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, this was so fun. I really enjoy, especially as a fellow woman, like the opportunities that we have to get together and talk about some of this stuff. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, everyone. I should say thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.